longest executive director in the organization's 50-year history. And as a side note, Jamia and I have a profound love for jazz music. Without further ado, I give you Jamia.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this warm welcome. I'm just so honored to be here and to be with these brilliant women and brilliant panelists and all of you who've joined this conversation today. I've been watching social media ever since this panel's been announced, and it has been really heartening to see how many people want to be a part of this conversation. I personally want to say I've needed this conversation as a Black woman who works, and I think that it is really special for us to have this opportunity to come together today and speak a little bit about the issues that we're facing in this, and I am going to be cliche right now, unprecedented time. You've probably heard that word many times lately, but I think that we also have an opportunity now to reinvent the way that we look at the world, the way we look at the workplace, and the way we look at our power. I am celebrating the news around our vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, who made history yesterday, and I hope she'll continue to make history moving forward, and really thought about what it means for her to be in this position of leadership, to be recognized for the work that she's done, but also what it means to women and girls and non-binary children who will look up to her, people of Jamaican descent, Black folks, Indian folks, and all of us who have not seen ourselves recognized in the heights of power where we should be represented equally and justly. So I would be remiss if I did not mention that we're having this conversation during a moment where we are seeing what it means to have Black women's power and Black women's power at work being brought to center stage, but also looking at what we're already seeing around the challenges and obstacles that she's facing around sexism in the media, intense scrutiny, minimizing of her experiences and expertise in the midst of the great credibility that she comes to the table with. So I want to say that I think that seeing her ascension is a global conversation to have as we talk about what it means to have Black women's leadership placed into the fore and how that relates to economic justice and also how that relates to power and our wages. So I want to introduce our distinguished panel, but right before I do that, I wanted to just read you a quote that I was reading for something that I'm writing for a book next year that came to mind as we were talking about the conversation about our work. And this is a quote by Cherry Moraga, who is a Chicana feminist writer and activist whose work has very much inspired mine. She said, "In this country, lesbianism is as a poverty as is being brown, is as being a woman, as is being just plain poor. The danger lies in ranking the oppressions. The danger lies in failing to acknowledge the specificity of the oppression. The danger lies in attempting to deal with oppression purely from a theoretical base, without an emotional, heartfelt grappling with the source of our own oppression, without naming the enemy within ourselves and outside of us. No authentic, non-hierarchical connection among oppressed groups can take place." And I thought about those words in relationship to the conversation we're having today, because we are having the heartfelt conversation to talk about our power and also the obstacles that we face systemically today, and hope that this conversation we have will also ignite other conversations that will reverberate around the world with everyone who's joined in tonight. So with that, I would like to start getting ready to talk about the panel and also introduce you to Michele, Ghee, and Minda Harts, who are joining me tonight. And we're also going to be speaking with Raquel Willis as well, all distinguished and brilliant trailblazers who have made different interventions in the workplace with their own experiences as well. And so I'm really honored to be here with them, to learn from them, and want to tell you a little bit about their work. So Minda Harts is the CEO of the Memo LLC, a career development platform for women of color, and she's the best-selling author of the Memo, what women of color need to know to secure a seat at the table. I had the pleasure of reviewing that book when it first came out, and I'm really excited to see its success. Minda is an assistant professor at NYU Wagner, and she's been featured on a host of outlets and hosts a weekly podcast called Secure the Seat. And Michele Ghee has managed more than $1 billion, $1 billion, folks, in revenue for some of the world's largest media companies. That blew me over, just like raised my goals when I read your bio and inspired me. And those companies include CNN, A&E, the History Channel, the Weather Channel, BET Networks, and BET Her. And Michele is a strategic force inside and outside the bounds of corporate America. She currently serves as a co-founder and managing partner of Stratechic Alliance, and she has received a host of honors, including the Ad Color Change Agent Award, the American Advertising Federation Mosaic Role Model of the Year Award, the She Runs It Working Mother of the Year Award, class of 2018, and most recently, a Multi-Channel News 2019 Wonder Woman. And so I'm clapping for them both here, and I know we would all be cheering if we were all together, but I'm really excited to welcome them. And also just want to say that for those who don't know, advertising and publishing are industries where women of color, and Black women specifically, are very, very underrepresented. So I'm also really excited to see women who are powerful in both of those fields in this conversation with us, so that we will not continue to be first, but that many more will come with us and join the conversation. Thank you. So I wanted to just check in to see, do we have Raquel here yet?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. Great, wonderful. I'm so happy to see you. Sorry, because of Zoom, I wasn't able to see you yet. So I wanted to also welcome Raquel Willis, who is a Black transgender activist, writer, and media strategist dedicated to elevating the dignity of marginalized people, and particularly Black transgender people. She is the communications director of the Ms. Foundation, the former executive editor of Out Magazine, where her trans obituary project was nominated for a GLAAD Media Award, and she has served as a national organizer for a transgender law center. She's founded the Black Trans Circles to develop the leadership of Black trans women in the South and the Midwest to address anti-trans murder and violence. And she will be releasing The Risk It Took to Bloom, her debut essay collection about her coming of identity and activism with St. Martin's Press in 2021, which is very, very exciting. And I imagine that you can pre-order now for that. So that's something we should all do while we are on this Zoom. So I'm really happy to greet you, and really thrilled that we're all together today to have this conversation. Thank you all so much. So let's dive right in. So Raquel, tell me right now, I'm sure there's a lot of questions that we would all have for you, but I'm wondering, what particular advice would you give on navigating the workplace in today's context?
You have to unmute her, Stephanie.
Okay, I was freaking out a little bit. I was like, I can't unmute. I'm sorry, could you ask one more time?
Sure, of course. So I'm wondering about any advice that you would have for anyone who's joining us today about navigating the workplace in today's context.
Absolutely. You know, I'm one of those people who really had to learn, I think, the hard way that I have to work within my passion and organize within my passion. I came into journalism, obviously, through J School, and really found that I wasn't learning in general from folks who knew what it was like to be a Black woman, and of course, to be a Black trans woman in media and in journalism. And so I really had to pave a way, I think, in a lot of ways for myself. And so it was really important for me to figure out what my actual interest in journalism was. And during that time, it was a space of the emergence of the movement for Black Lives. And so I really wanted to figure out how I could connect my interest in moving forward liberation for Black folks, for queer folks, and trans folks in that space. So I think it's really about finding what your actual interest is and passion is with the skill sets that you are learning, and also connecting with and finding people who speak to the possibility of what you would like to become. You know, there's so many brilliant folks on this panel, of course, and then I'm sure in this audience, but just around. So find those people who can kind of give you that nugget of vision for what you would like to become as well.
That's great advice. I mean, I was thinking about that too, just even in reading in your bios, right? Expands what I think is possible to become. And I think that's so important for us to gather in these spaces and see what's possible and to connect with people. And that's such great advice. So my next question is for Michele G. And we talked a little bit about COVID-19 and its impact, but I'm wondering from you about how the pandemic has forced a lot of reflection for so many of us about how to balance both our personal and professional worlds. How have you come to grips with how to manage self-care, and how would you advise someone, whether they live by themselves or whether they have children or elders or pets to take care of at home in addition to working the entrepreneurial grind? How have you managed it? And do you have any tips that you can share with others about how to balance all of this? Or is balancing even the right word for me to use? Is there another path?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining. I know everyone is tired of Zoom calls, right? And so thank you for coming. It's an honor to be part of this conversation. And I'll say this, that on March 31st, I left corporate America. And I decided to part and launch my own firm. You know, timing is everything, right? And then 5 days later, COVID happened and there was a lockdown. And then I actually got COVID. And so I was really sick. And so I'm sitting there like, does God remember my name? And it was a really reckoning moment for me because I had built so much and I had been this force in the books I had written and the things I had accomplished. And guess what? Now there is a level set for all of us because your car doesn't matter, your clothes, your hair, the lip, like none of that matters. The lipstick you covered. And it really allowed me an opportunity to sit down and reflect my life. And what I knew was that I was not finished. And I want anybody who can hear my voice, you're not finished either, right? And so this is an opportunity for us to reset and to pivot. And that's exactly what I did. So this is what I did. When I left corporate America, and I contribute to our household in a really big way. And right, I'm like, we don't want our lifestyle to change. But when I left corporate America and I got sick, what I took on was fear, anxiety, and self-doubt. And so I had to readjust and I had to look at myself in the mirror. I was like, Michele Thornton G. And like, everyone has to do this. You have to be the owner for your own self-care and you have to get there, right? It's layers. It's like, I got to pay my bills. I got to do this. I'm training my kids. I have a 13 and 15-year-old. My husband obviously now thinks I'm like the grocery keeper. I'm like, that's not what I do. Right. And so I had to reel it back and I had to put self-care at the top of the thing. And so what I replaced with is prayer and purpose and planning. And I want you to write those 3 P's down, because if you don't have a purpose, and I pray you can meditate whatever your way is, if you're not doing that and you're not planning, this is going to be a disaster for everybody. You have an opportunity right now to readjust, to pivot, to look and see what's going on in your life and to do something different. And when I did that, speaking engagement started flowing in. Job opportunities that I don't even want because I'm trying to be an entrepreneur, but so many things happened for me because I readjusted myself, my attitude, and I let things go that just weren't positive in this time.
Thank you. And I love how you talked about this with actionable takeaways as well, in terms of, how we care for ourselves, but things that we can all implement tonight, tomorrow morning. And
don't wait till tomorrow, girl, do it tonight.
Tonight. Yes. So Minda, want to hear a bit from you. What would you suggest to a Black woman who is either tired, drained, sick and tired of being tired, or just starting her career, listening to this discussion right now about how to navigate the choppy waters of the workplace today? What words would you have for her?
Wow. Well, first, I just want to say thank you for having me. And I'm so honored to be sharing the stage with all the women that are on the panel. Big fans of you all. I'd say, I see you. I feel you. It's real. The feeling is real. I'm tired too. It's a lot. It was a lot before COVID, being a Black woman in the workplace, and it's a lot during quarantine. And so it's okay to feel tired, but I don't want you to stay there. Right. And so I think it's okay to feel the feelings, because I think as Black women, we often haven't been conditioned to call what our pain is or talk about trauma. And I think we have to call it what it is and identify it so that we can heal from it. And, this is a unique opportunity, I think, as, women of color, as Black women, and allies, quite frankly, that the decisions that we make today in the workplace will dictate our futures and the future generations of women of color and Black women to come. And so, don't get too tired. Definitely pause if you need to, but continue to be the change you want to see. A lot of these companies are giving commitments in terms of, they're going to do better, do right by us, if you will. And so lean into that. This is our time. I said, it feels good to be a Black woman in America right now. Okay, so lean into that. They're saying this is what we want to invest in. This is how we want to invest. So hold them to it. Say, actually, I'd like to talk to you about that. I have some ideas too. Come with your ask. Make sure your ask aligned with their bottom line. And this is your time to secure your seat. I think if we be strategic, right, we can get what we want. We can secure those seats, and we can bring each other with us, because they're looking for us. And I think that rather you are at someone's table right now or you build your own, this is our time. So I hope you were encouraged. The ancestors are praise dancing in the heavens right now because of this moment. And so we get to lean into that. And so even though you're feeling tired, know that this is our time. And it couldn't be, it's like the perfect storm, right? It's bittersweet, but figure out what your worth is, quantify that, and articulate your value, and ask for what you want. That's what I hope you'll practice, is getting what you want. Okay, whatever your tomorrow is Black Women's Equal Pay Day, whatever your ask was before, you're not asking big enough. And so lean into it. Everything's bigger right now. And so I hope you feel that energy.
I love it. And secure your seat. I really took that from what you said, to secure our seat. And I'm just thinking about a TV writer who I really respect, Black woman, who was celebrating yesterday about our new news. And I wrote to her about just how excited I was along with her. And she wrote, "You're in a wonderful position to unleash hell right now. I hope you enjoy." And I did a screenshot of that to remind myself, because this is a woman I look up to. She runs a group for women screenwriters over 40, and I'm not 40 yet. I'll be 40 in October, but I remember saying, do you let under 40s, can this under 40 become a part of it? And they were saying, yeah, we'll think about it. But to get that from her and to see that, she already sees in me a power that I have not known yet in myself, I think is really, really important for us. And so I wanted to share that, the secure your seat, and the advice that you've all given so far, that we can be that mirror back to our sisters and our siblings, and to say, I see you, and I see your power. I see where you need to go. Secure your seat, own your throne. It's so important. So I also wanted to talk with you a little bit about, you brought up this idea of trauma, and we've talked about, what it means when our trauma makes us sick, right? When all that we've had to carry, we start to feel it in the body, and the body knows a lot times before our head knows or wants to accept when a situation has become untenable for us. And I've thought a lot about this as it relates to what that means for us as Black women in the workplace, myself being someone who's navigated many autoimmune experiences throughout my working life, and knowing that a part of that is the tremendous amount of stress I've had to carry for myself, but also for many others who depend on me, and how much of that is systemic. And I know that I'm not alone in that when we look at our health indicators. And so I wanted to talk about this article that I read in the Baltimore Business Journal about how Black women are not our organization's nurturers, but Black women should be given reciprocal nurturing instead of being expected to nurture everyone else. And there's a deep history of tropes around why that is, and why we've been expected to carry everyone else's water. But it really got into my bones reading the piece and talking about what kind of positive action we can take for ourselves, but also how our organizations can recognize this dynamic when it's happening and prevent it from happening, how our organizations can give more of the empathy, nurturing, and mercy that we're expected to give everyone else to Black women working within our organizations. And so I wanted to hear if any one of you on the panel wanted to speak to that, about what it would look like if what we give was actually reflected back to us, and what that new reality might look like in our workplaces.
Well, I'll jump in. You know, I'm a person who understands words have power. And you said something, you said everyone expects us to, but just because everyone expects us to doesn't mean that we have to. And I believe one of our best traits, matter of fact, I Google, it's like, what are women's best traits? And our best traits are exactly what corporate America is built on. It's listening, it's relationship building, it's empathy, it's, you know, including everyone. That's why we're amazing diversity and inclusion advocates, and why when women join a company, profits increase by 35%. It's because we can do all of these things, right? But we take it upon ourselves. We think that is our role. And I say, we don't have to do that. Like, we don't have to take that on. And so one of the things that I wrote in my first book is that I created an elimination list. And so, you know, you start with your family, right? Everyone just plug your ears, but we all know we got family members that need to be put on an elimination list, not in a mean way, but they take more than they're willing to give. And what they're doing is they're taking away from your time and your purpose. There's a quick story I want to tell. You know, this woman, she does all these things. She's an amazing person and she gives so much, and she gets to heaven and she just starts crying when she sees God and all of these gifts at the altar. And God goes, those are the gifts I had for you that you never opened. And so I made it a point that I'm going to open up every gift, and you can't open up your gifts if you're giving time to people and to things that don't earn it. And so I would embark on everybody, before you leave this tonight or when you wake up in the morning, put an elimination list together, and don't text folks, tell them they on the list, because that means you ain't serious. But it really is important that you got to clear space for you to walk in your destiny.
Yeah, I love that too, the elimination list. One of the things I've heard, and I think it's my friend Latham, I think, is the one who said it, that that you need to edit some people, right? That that like your time and your energy is valuable, and so you have to be really discerning about who gets that access to that time and energy and the prioritization of that. And as an editor, you know, I really started thinking about my job in a different way, to think about, oh, how do I edit my life in a way that allows me to realize my purpose and also not be distracted by noise or other people's projections. And I think that is really important, especially as we are working within systems that were not designed for us to flourish and thrive in, right? And trying to figure out, you know, how those systems can improve, but us knowing that, you know, we still need to thrive ourselves in the midst of it. Did anyone else want to comment on that at all?
I guess I'll jump in. I think it's important to, if we have any, well, we're all leaders. Everybody has a sphere of influence and we're all leaders. You don't have to have the title to be a leader. And I want to talk to those who have influence inside their workplace, because I think that oftentimes, you know, as Black women, we are supposed to be the teachers, we're supposed to give people the homework, we're supposed to do our work, you know, there's so much that we're supposed to do, to be the fixer, all the things. And we get to rewrite your job description today. You know, we get to redefine success by our own terms. We're in an environment where there are no rules. We get to create the rules right now. And so while we're in the space, I think we should, you know, definitely lean into that. And the other thing I'll say is, you know, the companies, it's incumbent that they provide that psychological safety for Black women in the workplace and women of color, is because oftentimes we don't feel like we can speak up when certain things are going on. If we do have all this stuff on our plate, you know, we don't want to say anything. We're just happy to be here. We're just grateful for the opportunity. And, you know, we worked really hard to get here. And so let's redefine, you know, our narrative. I love what Michele said about the, you know, just, you know, don't text people and tell folks what you're doing, you know, just start to do it, right? You know, make that intention. And companies, figure out what your tone is, what your language you're using, what's taking place in these Zoom calls. Like, are you creating that psychological safety so Black women and women of color can speak up, can have the agency to say, you know what, I don't want to take on this project right now, and that there's no backlash. And I think, you know, part of that is that we're going to have to be courageous and have some of these conversations and let people know where our line is. When I think back to my career in corporate America, I was definitely afraid of saying no. I had one white man that told me early in my career, never say no to anything, right? And I was stressed out, anxious, all the things. And I never thought that I could, right? And sometimes it's okay to exercise your rights. And so, you know, figure out what it is you want for your career. And this is the time to do that. You know, if you want to make some edits to your life, this is the time to do that, and tell people what you need. You know, I wish that all of our managers had a crystal ball and when they'd be like, what does psychological safety look like for Minda? But most of them are not as emotionally intelligent, right? So sometimes we have to tell people what it is we need from them. And so I would encourage you, it's small acts of courage. What would it look like if you stood in your truth and you centered yourself? Because we've been centering everybody else in the workplace while nobody has centered us. And so I hope that as Black women, as women of color, you will consider, not telling you what to do, you're all grown, but consider what centering yourself might look like in the workplace.
I mean, I was just thinking about the title of Raquel's debut essay collection, The Risk It Took to Bloom, in the context of this conversation. Like when you said, you know, this idea of feeling like there was a risk to kind of, you know that there's systems outside of ourselves that are pushing us in one direction, but knowing that who you are is the force, and that force is valuable, and that force is divine and prime within us. And so I love the title. I am a book person, so I was immediately gripped. But I was wondering, Raquel, if you had anything to say about this subject, because I thought about the title of your collection as it relates to identity and activism, but then also about, you know, what does blooming mean? How can we thrive? How can we create spaces where all of us can thrive? I think we need to unmute
Stephanie,
you.
she's on mute.
Okay, here we go. I'm so used to the Zoom etiquette where I mute like immediately after I speak because I'm so afraid something's gonna happen. There's gonna be like a sound. So there's been a few times I'm like, oh, I wanted to say something. Yeah. So Jamia, yeah, I think that I really resonate a lot with what Minda, you were saying, particularly about figuring out how to name what your needs are. I think we're so conditioned to not actually analyze in our own personal lives, like what fits for us, what structures fit for us. Every time we get to a new workplace, it's like we got to adjust to a new space. And it's actually like we have a body of knowledge within us that of what we react well to, what conditions are good for us to grow in or to bloom in. And so I think having that at least personal historical knowledge about what works for you and being brave enough to bring that into whatever space you're in helps you out so much. I think the other thing too is just realizing that we are all human. You know, the workplace, our industries love to make us feel like we are just gears in a machine, but you are a human being, right? So you are going to be at work some days, and especially when you're a Black woman or a woman of color, you're going to feel angry sometimes. And I don't want folks to continue to feel like they have to mute how they feel, right? Especially as women, we're told we can't be emotional. We have to be these like robots. And it's like, no, actually, if I'm feeling angry, I'm going to take my second, feel my emotions, and figure out how to work through it. Celebrate my wins, right? We don't even get space really to celebrate, or we're called too ambitious or bossy. You know, we've seen a lot of those things about some of the VP contenders before Kamala was named. So it's very important for us to allow ourselves the space to be human, to feel what we need to feel. And then the last thing I will say is that what has helped me a lot has been having accountability buddies. If you're lucky, you can have those accountability buddies within your workplace, but sometimes our only accountability buddies are the ones outside of the workplace that may still be in the same industry. And those are really folks like you can go to and talk about these different things. Sometimes they may be able to give you advice. Sometimes it's just, I needed to vent, girl. Like, my boss said X, Y, and Z today and made me feel away. I think also figuring out when you've actually messed up or when it's actually like, because sometimes it's not black and white, right? When someone has messed up or when someone else hasn't, right? Like our bosses, people we report to may have their own triggers or whatever, right? And we're kind of negotiating our triggers together. And so I think being able to talk to another source can help you and give you that like boost of confidence as you navigate. So I'm all for the accountability buddies.
I love that. And I wanted to share that if there's anyone who feels like, you know, you are seeking people in your life who could be those buddies for you, but you don't have them now, there are great organizations like The Crew that Tiffany G. Fu started, and I'm a member of it, where you can get matched with other like-minded women who can work with you, and you get set up with a crew in the same constellation as it's set up, and you're taught how to be peer coaches for each other and to support each other's leadership, and you're supported in that process, but also given the tools to be accountability buddies with each other. And I can just say that so many tangible intentions that I've set through that program have grown. Even though I had my own personal crew, I went and did this too to have some new people, because one thing a therapist once told me that I just want to share really resonated. Sometimes there are people in your life who love you, but are not invested in your growth because they're invested in keeping you where you were for the narrative they have of the world. And just having that said to me shifted so much to say that sometimes you need to branch out to people who may not feel like their agenda is threatened when you grow. And so I really like having opportunities like joining groups like The Crew or other sort of professional associations to work with other women, because sometimes there are people who love you who are in your crew, but they can't see you past who they knew at 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 or however you are in your work, that you might need some people who kind of aren't invested in seeing you the way they've always seen you. And that was some of the best advice I've ever been given as well. So the next thing I want to move on to is the pay gap. And, you know, just to acknowledge that the pay gap can't be discussed as an average number. Black women make 66 cents to the white man's dollar, while white women make 80 cents. Asian women make 97 cents, Latinx 58 cents. And moreover, we know that transgender folks, they face significant wage disparities beyond this, particularly transgender women with a loss of earnings by nearly 1/3. So this disparity is especially acute for Black LGBTQ people, but also along with hiring and firing practices, this poses a significant threat to the health and wellness of many of us and our families. So I wanted to ask you all, what has surprised you the most in terms of your career and your experiences with fair pay? If anyone wants to start with that. Minda?
Yeah, you know, I just want to also say that I love what Raquel said is humanizing. And I think that is really important when we talk about the pay gap, is because we need to humanize these experiences, right? All women don't get paid the same. And so I think it starts with us as women to say, you know, white women make this, Black women make this, trans women make this, to make the distinction that we're all not getting paid the same. And if I'm not free, then they aren't free either, right? And if there's pay inequality in the workforce, then there's racism in the workforce, then there's, you know, age discrimination, there's all the things. And so I think it's really important that we do take this issue on, because how do we close the wealth gap for Black women? That's tied to the wage gap as well. And so for me, what I can control is what I try to focus on. And every time I get the opportunity, I ask for more, right? And I talk with my sister friends and say, hey, what did you get paid for that speaking engagement last week? You know, and I talk to my white girlfriends, like, what did you get paid for that speaking engagement last week? Because one quick story, very quick, is I do a lot of public speaking, and one company asked me to come and speak. And originally they asked me to come speak before COVID-19, and I gave them my fee. They were fine with it. And then when we went into a virtual environment, they're like, oh, our budget is shifted, even though my work didn't shift, right? Okay, our budget shifted, and we can't pay you what we originally wanted to pay you. And so I said, okay, well, I want to do it for the culture, right? Whatever. If you can't do it, can you at least do this? And they said, okay, yeah, we'll do this. And so weeks had passed, and then I noticed this one woman they brought in to speak, and she's an author as well, and we follow each other on social media, and I did like the unthinkable. And sometimes you got to be courageous, right? I slid into her DMs and I said, hey girl, I know that you just spoke at so-and-so last week. Just curious, do you mind, I know this is weird, but could you tell me what they gave you as a pay? And she's a white woman, and they gave her triple the amount they were offering me. And I had to clutch my pearls, because I was like, what? And so I had two options, right? I could say nothing, or I could go back to them. And what I chose, because I realized that it's bigger than me. If I sweep this under the rug, then this is going to happen to the next Black woman or woman of color or trans woman that comes and they ask them to speak. So I had to lean into my courage and push aside my caution. And I wrote back to the person that asked me to come, and I said, I just found out that you had a speaker recently and you offered her this amount of money. I said, in good faith, I can't come to talk about women of color in the workplace, and you've offered me this. So if you want me to speak next week, then you're going to have to give me this. And they came around and they figured out how to give me what I asked for, right? But had I not done that investigation work? And I was scared. Let me tell you, I was scared. But as Audre Lorde said, beware of feeling like you're not good enough to deserve it. We deserve these coins.
Mm-hmm. Yes, all of the Tubmans. We deserve them. So, Raquel, what are your thoughts on how we can access women's collective power for gender justice while also holding space for these tremendous differences in our realities around this pay?
Absolutely. Well, I think to go back to that last question, because Minda has my brain kind of percolating over here. I think one thing that's been kind of shocking to me is, I've worked in nonprofits. I've worked in all trans spaces, or mostly trans spaces. I've worked with mostly folks of color, right? And I think what was shocking to me was that those same systems of oppression infiltrate those spaces as well. I've been paid less than trans men and trans masculine people on the same team, doing the same job with less not credibility, but less of a presence, I think, in terms of the work. And so that has been revealing to me. I've been turned down, especially earlier in my career, by some of these national LGBTQ plus nonprofits that now always, want to glean some type of brilliance from me, and typically not wanting to pay as well, right? And so I think within the LGBTQ plus community, within communities of color, within the Black community, we are also facing some of those issues that I think speak to, also going off of this Audre Lorde tip that we're on, using the same tools in the master's house, right? And we should all be on the same tip as far as wanting to dismantle the master's house, right? And meaning dismantling white supremacy in the workplace, dismantling the patriarchy in the workplace, ableism, transphobia, all of these different things. And so one of the ways I think that we can really start to turn a corner is understanding our capacity to both be oppressed and, have privilege within a space. So even as a Black trans woman, I think by a lot of people's barometers, I am the most oppressed in society. I actually don't want that title. We also hear it, I think, in general as Black women, right? That you're the most oppressed. And I think that it really takes the nuance out of a really important conversation, is that we've got to see all of our liberation bound up in each other, right? And so I've got to be willing to use whatever privileges and platform I have to lift up my sister, right? To lift up my sibling, whether they look exactly like me or have moved through the world exactly like me or not. And so I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, especially once we get into positions of leadership, we have to continue to want to break down some of these systems that were barriers for us. And that is hard, right? It is very human to get to a point where you're like, I struggled and now I got mine. And so you got to struggle as well to get to where I am. But that shouldn't be the way that we move forward. We should actually be trying to break down the barriers for the next person. And so for me, it's about particularly building space within the institutions that I've been a part of so that the next Black woman, the next woman of color, the next trans woman or queer woman doesn't have to check off as many boxes as I had to. You know, that you actually can have the space to dream and vision and live up to a higher potential because you have less struggles than maybe I had to trying to get into that space.
And I think that's so important, and that we have that power, collective power in the abundance versus scarcity model too, right? That we have to remember that the scarcity comes from those systems that don't work for us and that we're trying to move away from. And that's so important. So I wanted to ask Michele, who is in the entrepreneur space after, you know, working in the corporate space, and knowing that we have these really sad numbers around how less than 1% of all venture capital funding in the past decade has gone to Black women founders. What thoughts do you have about how this can change, and what kind of takeaways can we have about how we can change wage equity in that space? Because I think just looking at those numbers, it's showing me that there's a clear systemic problem around how we are valued as founders and as entrepreneurs when we give so much and we add so much value.
Well, first, let me just back up a little bit. You know, Black women have become the #1 entrepreneur in the world, meaning that we start more businesses than anybody. And I don't even believe it's because we wanted to. I think it's because we are survivors and we've had to. So when we're not getting the pay that we want after we've asked for it, we've shown them the numbers and the data. We've built relationships to try and make that happen. And and we still want to be invisible and ignored, like I was for many years of my career, even though I jumped over every hurdle. You raise it, I jumped over that. And I was like, yo, I'm not jumping over any more hurdles. Then I said, okay, well, you know what? Let me just start my own business. And what I realized, and when I did research, and we should all be equipped with the numbers, when we have the access to information the way we do now, we should be on our computers. We don't step in a room. We don't make a call. We don't have any conversation unless we've done our due diligence. And when I realized that 90% of Black women-owned business, women of color businesses, have 0 employees. So how are we going to get PPE money? How are we going to get loans and grants? Because it weeds us out, because what they're doing is they're giving it to the people with employees. And so I was like, there's another loophole. And I did not realize that. And so I hired my daughter, who's 15, and I paid her $10,000 on the spot. And I can funnel that money through an account, and I allowed her to take that money and pay her tuition. We have to be smart as our peers, right? And there are ways to do that. That means that you have to understand the rules around taxation. You have to understand the rules about having employees. You have to, and so I educated myself, and a person I want everybody to Google is Dr. Lynn Richardson. And she taught me, because I called her, I said, yo, you know everything about all of these financial loopholes. And she has managed and been partners with MC Light for a long time, who's a really good friend of mine. And Lynn is like, yo, Michele, you got to get smart. Like, you just can't be in these streets hustling. The other thing she told me to do is, she's like, write a book. And so I bowed down to Minda, I bowed down to Raquel, and I wrote that book in 6 months, because I garnered 1 hour a day in order to do that. Because when I looked at people on the speaking circuit, everyone had written a book, and the books weren't that great. Not these 2 ladies, but I saw some, I was like, yo, that's not even really a book. That's like a pamphlet. But I bowed down to them because they knew the game. And so while you have time, what are you going to write? What are you going to create? How are you going to be an entrepreneur, even if you're in corporate America? Because that's what I did. And the speaking fee I garner now is bigger than I had ever imagined, because I built up that equity in order to stand here and be here. And I might need to DM a couple people, Minda, thank you for that. that little note. But you understand what I'm saying? So you got to know the rules, right? So you got to be prepared. You have to know, you got to get your side hustle on, and you got to understand the rules in order to be a player in the game. And they're all right there.
Yes, yes. And, you know, just to say, for anyone who's interested in writing books, I am actually working on a webinar to help demystify the process of how to get published. So stay tuned with that, and it'll come up on my website. And the next couple of months of just a couple of different webinars with Fresh Speakers Academy around how to get an agent, how to create your book, how to get it published, how to create a proposal, because that's one thing I find a lot is that people don't understand that it's actually very formulaic. And, you know, now having authored, you know, over 5 books myself, I say to people, yes, you have to have the creativity, but you also need to know how books are made, and you need to know what steps you need to take to get them done. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there's so many people whose stories aren't out there that we need to hear. So I also wanted to get into conversations a little bit around some of the obstacles we face around microaggressions and authority and power. And Minda's book gets into some of those shared experiences that Black women have often in the workplace. And, you know, I've talked to friends from London to Paris to places all over the world who have experienced these microaggressions. So in the book, Minda clarifies what some of these look like and does this so that people can be more aware if they're the aggressor. Comments about your hair or appearances and are some of those common threads. And then we see that show up in policies that are also really important for us to transform because they're obstacles in the workplace. I think I saw something recently about Jamaica and a dreadlocks ban around people being able to say that that would be a barrier to employment. And we've seen that in certain parts of the United States as well. So I wanted to ask these distinguished panelists about microaggressions and want to hear from Minda about specifically what this kind of repetitive diminishment looks like in a workplace. How can we interrupt it? And what is the significance of having awareness about the language that we choose and use? And this is for allies, but also for Black women navigating the workplace.
Yeah, you know, it was the reason why writing the memo was so important to me is because we often, as Black women, as women of color, we don't get to read about our stories in the workplace. We're often just all, you know, that broad stroke of women in the workplace. But as we all know, all women don't experience the workplace the same, even if they're working at the same place. And so I realized that I wanted to tell there was a gap in career development as it pertained to Black women and women of color. And I wanted to talk about that because for so long we've said, or they've said, I'm sorry, the system, the dominant majority has said that, oh, sweep that under the rug. That's just Chad being Chad, you know, like these things aren't happening in real life, that racism, you know, they act like that's just something that'll disappear. And now we're in this backdrop in the workplace where we once couldn't play the race card, whatever that is, and now all they want to do is talk about race, you know? So it's a really weird, I feel like that's even a microaggression on some level. And I've kind of tried to move around. In the book, I use the word microaggression, but it really is racism at the end of the day. And I feel like there's a meter for it. But one of the instances that I had is I had a manager and I had burnt orange fingernail polish on. And he said, he saw that I had it on and he said, "You people love bright colors." And then he went on to joke around for 15 minutes about how Black people love bright colors. And I'm the only Black woman that works in this company. And I was with another colleague and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I could say anything, right? Because if I do say something, I've taken it the wrong way. If I say something, I'm the angry Black woman. Everything is centered on them. And so I realized I taught myself how to sweep it under the rug. The narrative that I started telling myself, which is really dangerous, is that Chad didn't mean any harm, right? Kim didn't mean any harm, when eventually the harm was meant to me. And that, like Erykah Badu says, we become bag ladies, right? And all those bags gonna get in your way eventually in the workplace, and you can't thrive the way you really want to. And so I think it's important that in that situation, there was another colleague, and he sat there and let my boss joke around about how Black people like bright colors. And what could the narrative have been had he stepped in and said, "We don't make those jokes. around here, or at least come behind me after it was all over and said, you know, Minda, I failed you in that moment. I'll never let that happen again, right? But they don't humanize us. They don't look at us like their sisters, their mothers, their brothers. And so they don't see that those things hurt us, but it's our language, it's our tone, it's the things that we say. And there's a chapter in my book where I wrote the book for everybody, but it centers women of color and Black women. But there's a chapter in my book called No More Passes. And it explicitly talks to white people about the things that they've been doing in this world, claiming that they didn't mean any harm, that we don't have time to give passes anymore. And I think it's really important that we call these things a thing. And hopefully the collective, as more if we're talking about this, then we can change the way that the workplace works for everybody.
Thank you. And just even hearing that, it's a reminder of kind of all those paper cuts we often have to endure that become these bigger wounds. And so I just, sorry that you've had to experience that, and for everyone on the call who has, but I'm really glad that we're talking about tangible ways that we can interrupt it. So Raquel, in my own experience, I've encountered patterns of people questioning my authority, my intelligence, infantilizing me, and often asking me if I understand something or if something makes sense, as if I don't regularly use the same language that they do to navigate throughout the day. And I even catch myself after years of internalizing this, asking people over and over if I'm making myself clear. So have you seen this in any way in your own career or observed it in any of the spaces you've been in? And do you have any advice for others who might be navigating this sort of experience?
Yeah, I definitely have experienced that. I mean, I think especially coming into my career, very young, and kind of knowing which lanes I wanted to be in early, right? I didn't really have much of a period of exploration in terms of whether I was going to go into media or whether I was going to go into comms and activism. It kind of was something that I already had an inkling for, having gone to journalism school. So I was lucky in that sense. But I definitely have had my abilities underestimated or diminished. And I think to also talk some about, Michelle's beautiful advice on having a side hustle, right? Like, a lot of my credibility, unfortunately, didn't come from the skills that I actually gained in studying journalism or my experience in various parts of media. It came from the street cred that I gained as a thought leader, from using social media as a platform, talking about my experiences, but also commenting on media and all of these different things, right? And in some ways it's great, right, that we have democratized, I think, how to have our voices heard, but it's also unfortunate that extra work had to happen for me to even be seen as credible in my field, in a way that my white counterparts, my cisgender counterparts, my straight counterparts did not necessarily have to do those things. I was not going to be the girl, typically the white girl who was privileged, who got the internships at the big magazines and had those opportunities in college, right? Or sometimes even in high school. Like, that just was not going to be it for this Black trans woman. And so I've definitely experienced that. I think it does take a bit to figure out how to not internalize those feelings of inadequacy, because they go hand in hand with our imposter syndrome that I think a lot of women face. But I do think that having those accountability buddies comes in handy there, because you can get that outside view without, I think, maybe the bias of the internal dynamics of the organization. If you have the access to like a career coach, that can also be a very important avenue to gaining the confidence that you'll need to navigate those things. And then hopefully you'll be able to build up your arsenal of protection. And I think for me, I've as I've grown in my career, I've been able to have more candid conversations with people that I'm working with around, okay, what is actually my stuff and what is your stuff? What are the things that you have internalized around white supremacy and discounting women of color and Black people, around transphobia and discounting a trans woman, all of these different things, right? Discounting people of a different background. And then I think it's also being very clear about what your course of action is when you do actually need to file a complaint about something, right? Like, we've got to move to a point where we're not afraid to ruffle some feathers for the respect and the dignity that we deserve. And so if you need to report somebody, that needs to happen. And so you need to have those relationships, hopefully with whoever is in HR, whoever the person is to report these things to, so that you can get the accountability that you're looking for and be very clear about what that accountability can look like. Again, and this is assuming that you can even trust maybe the folks that operate in that space within your organization.
Thank you so much. So speaking of accountability and also how this relates to claiming our power and our own authority, I wanted to ask Michele one last question before we go to Q&A, which is, as we gain authority and there's this not so subtle pressure to assimilate into what is often a cis white male culture or patriarchal culture, or a culture that's focused on a very specific dynamic that may not align with our experiences. Can you tell us about your learnings about how we can show up as ourselves and also thrive professionally in an entrepreneurial space, but also in corporate spaces and other organizations?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about corporate America because that really is where we have to assimilate every day. So the first thing is, the most overused word in the world today is culture, because everyone has a different definition of it. So you know what happens. You get hired. Oh my gosh, I have this amazing African-American woman with all this experience and she's different. She's going to bring all this. And you walk in the door and they're like, now go fit into the culture. But the culture doesn't look like me. And that's not why you hired me. And then you become a troublemaker, right? And so this is what the challenge is. So I want everyone to understand, it is always good to educate yourself. So, after I got COVID, I was sitting here, I was like, let me take a class. And I really am interested in diversity and inclusion. So I called Cornell, I negotiated a great rate, and I took this diversity and inclusion class because I wanted to know more. It's great to say I was born this way and a taxi passed me up and y'all didn't promote me or pay me. I got so many stories. Oh, it would take all day. But it's great to back it up with academia. So what I learned is this: the brain can process 11 million pieces of data, but they actually only focus on 4 pieces of data. And that data comes from historical relevance from a past situation. So I meet Minda and I meet Raquel, and I'm going to judge them based on an experience I had that probably wasn't positive, because guess what we do? We remember the negative. And so what happens is people are judging me based on something negative that happened with a woman kind of like me, and they're putting me in a bucket. So now when I'm at work and I'm trying to do my thing and I'm trying to be different, they're like, she's a troublemaker. No, I'm making revenue and you asked me to be this. So we're asked every single day to assimilate into something that is abnormal to them. And until we're running companies, that assimilation process is exactly the same for everybody. And it really is unacceptable. So I say in this given time, what I hope we're doing is I hope we're holding all of the corporate America's marketing campaigns that are saying they believe in Black Lives Matter, because that's what they mostly are just marketing campaigns, that we're holding them to it. It's like, okay, you hired me and I want to have a fundamental understanding before I accept this job what culture is here. And so we have to walk in a lot of self-awareness, or we're going to be put in a situation where we're going to be miserable and not happy and not walking in our God-given gifts, because there is a different perception of what culture is. So I say, get a firm definition before you say yes. Can I wear my hair like this? Can I walk like this? Can I get down like this? Because if you can't, you're not going to be productive and you're going to be out of the door.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all of your wisdom for this panel. And I want to hear from you. We have some questions. I know I've seen some questions on Twitter and I know that we have some questions from our friends at UN Women. So we would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Jamia. So it is 7:38. I'm being respectful of everyone's time, so we're just going to jump right into it. So our first question comes from Monica off of Instagram. She asks, how do you balance the need for radical social change, the strong Black woman image, and the need for wellness and self-care? It feels like we can't afford to rest, and we are not expected to rest. So Minda, do you mind taking that question?
She's on mute, Stephanie.
I think I'm back. What, could you repeat just the last part of the question, please?
You got it. So the last part is, it feels like we can't afford to rest and we are not expected to rest.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true, right? I think that is the expectation, but like we were talking before, I think it's important to remind ourselves that we get to make the decisions, right? We get to decide what rest looks like for us. We get to decide what self-care looks like for us. And I think, you know, even me recently, I don't know about all of you, but I feel like I've been busier in quarantine than I was outside of quarantine. And I recently had a hearing situation that had happened. I went down to 30% hearing. So during COVID, I'd been down to 30% hearing, and it's very, very difficult and still speak and do the things and still keep working. And I finally had the opportunity to go and get a procedure done. And they said to me, well, you know, you're gonna have to take like 4 days off. That was probably like the first time. And I felt some kind of way about, like, I can't stop working, right? I have to be doing these things. And, you know, people need me to be in this space and that space. And I said, Minda, you're not going to be able to run this marathon if you don't take care of yourself right now. Mm-hmm. And that means that you're going to have to listen to your body. If you want to hear 100% again, you're going to have to sit down somewhere, as my mom used to say. And I had to give myself permission to do that and know that the work is still going to be there. Systemic racism isn't going to be solved in a couple of Zoom calls. Like, it's okay if Black women want to rest right now, you know? So give yourself that permission. But again, be strategic about what you want. We need rest so that we can plot and we can plan and we can take over. And so you can't do that tired and weary. And so we need you for the long game. And so, you know, center yourself. I know it's hard because we've been rooting and cheering everybody on, and we don't typically get to be on the receiving side of that, but we need you, sis. And so, you know, take that time and don't think about what's going on. Those companies, those issues, they're still going to be there, but we need you for the long haul. So give yourself permission. I can't tell you what self-care looks like, but investigate what it feels like for yourself, because we need all of us here. And Kamala Harris is going to need us to have her back too. So we're going to have to get that good rest. So it's okay to rest at the end of the day.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Shagufta off of LinkedIn, and I'll pose this to you, Raquel. How does mindset impact how the panelists view equality in the workplace?
Mindset. Wow, okay. How does mindset impact how I view equality in the workplace? Yeah, I think that I have been fortunate to get to a point in my career where I walk into a space and, you know, my politics are already on my sleeve, honey. You know, like, I'm known as an activist. I'm an openly Black trans woman. You know, I'm having conversations about what abolition can mean for various groups. I'm working with different movements. And so I'm lucky in the sense that they get who they get. And I know that that is in many ways a privilege, right? Because for the beginning part of my career, I wasn't out in the workplace. I wasn't out as trans. I wasn't out as queer. And so it's so funny, you know, we were having the microaggression conversation and I would hear some very slick transphobic things and couldn't even react, right? Because I didn't want to implicate myself in that space that I was in. So, I think the mindset piece is, at the very least, it's important for us to get to a point where we are able to continue to see ourselves as the individual within a particular context. So, I say very confidently, I mean, I've said this to, people I work with, like, my allegiance is not to any institution, honey. Like, my allegiance is to Black folks, to queer and trans folks, within and outside of the space. And so that's always going to be at the forefront. So I'm going to call out the harm. I'm going to, walk as graciously as I can into conflict when necessary. So I can show up for people and be living with my values and working with my values at all time, right? And I think that that's hard, but that's how the mindset piece comes up for me. Yeah, and I the other thing I will add is that doesn't mean that I'm under any illusion that everyone else that I work with has the same mindset, right? I'm actually very acutely aware that most people I encounter won't necessarily have my same thoughts on what it means to really show up for trans people, show up for Black people, show up for women. And I honor that by, at the very least, trying to connect with where their mindset is, right? Trying to ask questions like, who are you? Outside of this role, who are you as a person? So that I know when the conflict does come, whether it's between us or me and somebody else, and I need your backup or you need me as backup, that we're bonded, right, on a human level beyond what we can produce, what we can create, how we can make someone else look good.
Thank you, Raquel. So now, Michele, this question is for you. And this question comes from E. Cooper. Michele, can you provide guidance on how to identify what our needs are? What is the framework? And she's couching it in this way: as a senior executive in a predominantly white and 95% female organization, it would be super helpful to have tools on how to say what it is we need.
So I'm going to have that person reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me at stratechic@gmail.com, because the answer is too complex to give her an appropriate answer right now. But what I will say is this: when I won the Wonder Woman Award, I spent 30 days on my speech because I wanted women to know that that does not end diversity, and that we have to invite other women onto their island. And what I see a lot of time is chief diversity officers that are white women. And I see, that they're heading this diversity initiative and they don't know our plight, our walk, our pain, our struggle, and what we have to give up every day. So I say, we're your sister too. And so that is a whole nother book that we have to write, because we can't just take care of one person, because that doesn't end the diversity conversation. And I see it over and over and over again. And it's frustrating and it's hurtful and it's painful. And I say they have a responsibility to us as well.
Thank you. And don't forget, E. Cooper, to reach out to Michele, because she will follow up for sure.
I sure will. Today, tonight, stratechic@gmail.com, or reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll respond immediately.
Thank you. So Jamia, you're up next. This question comes from Twitter. Thanks for this convo. Seems relevant to those who can take risk and we still hesitate and are not existing in the margins. For those who are not more vulnerable economically and otherwise, what resonates to center their needs as we break down positional leadership and workplace barriers?
It's a really good question. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge whom of us can take certain risks at a certain time and take those risks more safely without material consequences. or worse that could happen, and understanding that our power and proximity to privilege allows some of us to be able to have access to certain platforms or certain voice or certain protections that other people don't have. And so I think that that's a really good question, because it's something I think about quite a bit in terms of how can I use my voice, for example, in my field of publishing, working in an advocacy space at the intersection of publishing, to help people who may be in houses where they're not able to speak up about the same issues because of, like what Michele said before, what the cultural fit expectations are or standards are, or what they've signed on to, not being able to say materially, right? And so one of the things that I try to do is to be an ally in those spaces where I do have an ability with my voice and platform and the kind of space I work in to help amplify those issues and megaphone as a verb for people who may not be in the position to strategically say something. And there are other ways too. I always talk about building faction as something that I learned, and something that my late mom talked to me about in terms of her experiences being a CEO and her experience. I was lucky to have, people said, oh, how did you know what to do as the first as something, right? And this phenomenon of first, I can't wait until we're at a time where we aren't firsting anymore, because that comes with its own particular pros and cons. But I remember my mom just saying, you gotta, build your faction. Who are the people who are going to be not just your mentors, but your sponsors? Who are going to be the people who are going to be advocating for you in rooms when your name comes up and you are not there to advocate for yourself? And so a lot of also what can happen can be happening behind the scenes or outside of the space you're in the moment. A lot of times we talk about interrupting the microaggression or what we're saying in the moment, but we can also be building community, building power, building support in the space we're in with other allies who may or may not be in your department, may or may not be on your direct team. We can be building that community and building that base of power and that bench through networking and through also reaching out to people through, like I said before, organizations like the Crew, or also through affinity groups within organizations, specifically with people of color or allies who want to do work on your behalf. So I can say wholeheartedly that I've had some people who have been able to be the megaphone for me in spaces when I have not been able to be the one to say a thing for all of the systemic reasons that we talked about, but that they kind of clearly knew my position, clearly knew how to help advance a specific agenda, and knew how to put resources toward what needed to happen. And I also think a lot of it goes back to what Raquel said too about what is it that we have the power to do, right? So one of the things that I can speak to in my organization as a tangible example is that when I came in, I thought, oh, one of the things that we see in publishing so often that is a barrier is that a lot of people can't get in because of the fact that there's so many unpaid publishing internships that exist. And that's one of the reasons why you see such a specific group of white people who enter these spaces from a select number of schools typically, and often these are elite institutions who get in these roles. And so one of the first things I set out to do with the realm of power I had in my role, right, just for anyone who might have their role, was to say, I'm going to find a funder who is going to help fund a publishing apprenticeship program so that anyone who wants to have this internship can come, whether or not it's just for academic credit or not, but that they can actually get paid a wage to come in and do this work. And so it took time and work to do that, but I was able to build a coalition of people to get behind it, and we put it into our strategic plan. And now I'm happy to say that we have a paid publishing apprenticeship, and it's a very diverse publishing apprenticeship that looks like the publishing industry I want to see now and into next generations, not so much looking like the one that I'm coming up in right now. So I would say that. And then the last thing I would say is, think about what you have the power to influence in your space. Sometimes we think about these monumental things and shifts that we need to make, and it can feel really overwhelming. And I have learned a lot from seeing people who've been in more junior roles in organizations, but also when I was in a junior role, seeing the things I was able to look back on and say, oh, because my voice was there, it mattered. And I asked the questions that nobody else would have thought to ask, because I was in proximity to the problems that desperately needed solutions. And so I was just thinking about the amazing woman of color who does all of our operations and admin work, who's just a few years out of college, who approached me right during the uprisings and everything to say, oh, did you know that the company that makes our bubble wrap just got outed in terms of supporting a candidate who is anti-Black Lives Matter and is pretty racist? And so immediately, with her saying that, looking at our sheet, looking at where we were getting all of our supply chain, we went through and she said, let's look at getting all of our supplies from, when possible, companies run by women, people of color, LGBTQ people, but also all of our supplies from companies who at least are investing in our values. And so that was something that I was really inspired by, and was really, it was in alignment with our mission, but also kind of needed someone to point that out to me. I wasn't aware of where our bubble wrap was made, right? But actually, once I became aware of it, I realized, oh, these people are doing a lot of harm that is against the mission we have. And we spend a lot of money on bubble wrap each year because we package books. So I'm giving both of those examples to say that something that might actually seem small to you can start bigger conversations within an organization and can end up creating and sparking much broader change than you might imagine. And so think about what you have the power to change, who you can build and connect with, and who also can help you advance, who also can build with you, and who also understands that when you win, they win too. Those are the people who I have really worked hard to connect with in my work and to be of a support to as well. And I think tending those relationships like a garden is very beneficial.
Thank you. So I have two questions, but we could possibly end on this question and pose it to everyone. And this comes from Kathy in the chat. How can we show allyship for our trans colleagues in the workplace? And I'll let whomever would like to kick off the conversation. Minda?
I would love to. I don't know that I'm the best person to start. I'm gonna defer over to. For me, what I've done I consider myself an ally because I'm doing the work, and so I hate to call myself that. That's why I don't really want to answer the question because I think it really takes that action, you know. And for me, I tried to listen, I tried to educate myself, and then act. And right now, because we're in COVID, I act with my finances. I give to different organizations that benefit trans youth and trans women of color. And so that's the way that I'm able to. And I'm also, when I get an opportunity to talk about the wage gap and things of the sort, that's the way that I like to advocate. But I really do think that as allies, those who consider themselves, just like if you were in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or Brownies, in order to get the badge, you had to do an action, right? And so if you're calling yourself an ally, I hope that all of us will make sure that we actually have some real receipts, some tangible things that we can show that we've actually done. And I think that's really important. And allyship takes courage. So if you're not ready to put some skin in the game and roll up your sleeves, then you might want to sit out on the sidelines, because allyship is for the real ones. So that's what I'll say.
Yeah, shout out to Minda. That was everything. I agree. I mean, I do think that we throw these labels around very cavalierly, and people think, being an ally is just posting pink and white and blue colors, like those black square posts that we saw in the wake of the mass unrest around police violence, right? It's not just those signifiers, it's the actual action. I think it's also in talking about the deeper part of it. So we can list out actions, right? Like, I think, a lot of people are becoming aware around the importance of having space to name pronouns, right? Having procedures to respect folks, particularly if you're working with them and they have changeovers in their documents and things like that. Like, those are very particular actions, right? Not to mention even imagining hiring trans people in your workplace, right? Some people aren't even at that point. And so that is also, I think, one of those building blocks to whatever the final stage of allyship is. I don't know, maybe it's becoming trans yourself. But I'm just kidding. But I think that it is about a deeper kind of transformation, right? And so how can we break down these restrictive ideas that we have around gender in our lives across the board, right? So in the workplace, how do we break down these assumptions around what leadership looks like? Like leadership, for me, and especially when it comes to womanhood, it's not going to look exactly like me, right? It's not going to have the exact same experience as me, not have the exact same childhood maybe as me, but that doesn't take away their ability to be a brilliant, capable leader, right? And I think especially as women, we are called to understand what it means to be marginalized on many different levels, right? Because we know what it means to be discounted. And so I think that it's also about looking not only just in the institutions that you work in, but also the institution of the family, right? Like, how are you making sure that even in your personal life, you are showing up for trans people or people with different gender experiences? How are you holding people accountable when they say really slick things that you know are wrong, right? And maybe you don't know the exact way to frame it, right? But you still have a duty to say, I don't think that's quite right. You might need to Google that one, or read something about that, right? And so it's also about having that grace and understanding that we're all learning. And then I think the deeper thing for me is understanding that we're all on this gender journey. So we love to create binaries on top of binaries, cisgender and transgender and all of these different things. But to me, everyone is gender nonconforming in some way, because we will never embody anybody's ideal of what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a man. There will always be somebody telling you you are not enough, right? And so how do we silence those haters and silence maybe our indoctrination and being a hater ourselves, right? When somebody is different from us. So I think it's about those things. And I will also say, I mean, just as we make commitments to elevate women in general, right? To hire consultants who are women, to support businesses that are women owned. What does it look like to support the economic empowerment of trans people, so that we can be the ones at the tables coming up with the solutions to some of these problems, not just feeding our solutions to other people.
Thank you. So Jamia and Michele, I'm going to pose the last question to you. And this comes from a person, I just lost the question, from Tosin. What is the best strategy and ways to find a mentor? For Black women, it is hard to find a mentor who fully commits and pours into our lives.
I'll take that first. The other thing, I just want to jump on the other question about allyship. And I would say that, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves about everything. And reading is power and understanding is power, because what we know is that 80% of the decisions made about a lot of us happen in rooms that we're not present. And so it's really up to us to educate others. As it relates to education and mentorship, I would say that a lot of people are looking for mentors, but just as technology has changed, I would push back on that and say, I'm not sure that I'm looking for a mentor, because that takes a long time to build that relationship, right? It's an understanding, it's a meeting, it's time, it's a lot of things. So the people that we want to mentor us, they don't even have the time. And what I found over my 30-year career, all I really needed was an advocate or a sponsor, someone to open up a door, send an email, make a call on my behalf. So I don't want us to make this complicated. If you want a referral, then that's a quick 2-minute email from me, and that will typically get you an opportunity for a job. So you really have to evaluate. Don't be caught up in words and what they mean and things that are historical. Understand what you need, and then find the people in order to make that happen. Now, what's going to happen after this call? Every single person, the 200 or 300 people that were on the Zoom, you should have, and if you want somebody to do something for you, you should send them a piece of information, not about what you need, but something for them, right? Something for Raquel about what she's doing in her mission. something to Minda about her life, something to Jamia about her, and something to me who knows that I love community. Send it that helps us. And then you become memorable. And then guess what? We want to help you. You got to be smart in this game. And so if you want to build a relationship and you want someone to do something for you, then do something for us first. Show us that you understand the hustle, the game. And now you're a player. And I'm going to want to advocate for you. I'm going to want to sponsor you. I'm going to want to help you get that internship. And trust me, if I call somebody, at least they're going to listen. And that is where we are today as things are moving so quickly. So maybe you might have one mentor in your life, but you're going to have 100 champions, 100 advocates, 100 sponsors. Now focus on them.
Yes, that's beautiful. I mean, I was just thinking of someone who used to work on a book team that I used to work on. And she's moved and is like now just starting her entrepreneurial business outside of it, but just asked me if she could build a brand book for me. And, you know, I said, oh, I want to pay you for that. Right. But she said, oh, I want to get this out there. I want to do it and let's work on it. I want to do that with you. And I remember just thinking, oh, this is really amazing because I'm going to learn from her, but she's also kind of establishing a relationship with me around showing me what she can do. And I'm going to be able to refer that to many people. So I just want to echo what you're saying. I think that's extremely important. And my advice to that question is similar to what I've written in my book, Step Into Your Power. I have a chapter on finding a mentor, and I call it Creating a Life Apprenticeship. And basically, I write about how my husband, who's a jazz musician, and I were in a conversation one day in the car, as we often are, listening to really good jazz. And he was talking about how you can learn to read and play an instrument in school, but there's nothing as powerful as creative community and really listening to the masters of the craft. And talking about, you know, when you hear Bird or you hear Ornette Coleman, you hear Coltrane, there's something you learn just by watching a master do what a master does in their improvisational way. And that led me to really think about and write about how, oh, some of the people who mentored me without even knowing me are no longer on this earth. They have ascended. There's some of the people who have mentored and shown me how to apprentice them in life are artists like Lauryn Hill or Nina Simone or Erykah Badu, who, based on studying their approach to the trade, the way they embodied their work, the way that they were confident, positive, fearless, those things stuck with me about figuring out for myself what those values were and how I wanted them to show up in my life or where they already existed in my life. So I also want to just encourage people who are thinking about this to step into their power and think about who your life muses are. Think about who are the masters of craft, the masters of jazz for you. It might be someone different who you might never have gotten to meet, but they're writing their songs, their art, their poems, the way they hustle in the workplace, the way that they are building their business inspires you to move in the world. How did their presence show you a new way of being? And it doesn't mean you're not true to yourself. It just means that it's showing you a possibility. Celebrating that and really kind of studying them in their life. And that's why biography is my very favorite genre to read, because reading about how these life apprentices, as I call them, have managed adversity and lived triumph and joy has shown me how to have that in my own life. So that would be my advice too, to, you know, definitely reach out to the people you want to connect with. But, you know, I think of Anne Frank, whose writing inspired me greatly as a young woman and showed me, oh, you can be a writer someday. That I think of her as one of my mentors and one of my life apprentices, for example. And so there's so much we can access from looking at those people whose movement in the world can inspire us to see what's possible.
Thank you. Thank you to our beautiful panel. I've been inspired. I am truly overwhelmed to see this come together like it did, reaching out to all of you beautiful women, smart, talented, and overbooked, right? So I am humbled and super appreciative. And I hope everyone gained a nugget or two because I got a bucket. So I thank you.